On June 9, 1992, a farmer named Wu Anai started pumping water out of a pond near his village. In eastern China, one the locals had always called Bottomless Pond, more out of superstition than fact. He expected mud. What he found, once the water level dropped low enough, was a stone archway leading down into a chamber the size of a cathedral, carved entirely by hand out of solid rock, with no historical record anywhere describing what it was or who had built it. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how much labor it took to carve this space out of a mountain, why the engineering inside it still puzzles structural experts today, and why one of the most meticulous, record-keeping civilizations in human history left absolutely no trace of who did, or how they managed to keep something this large a secret for over 2,000 years. Within weeks, villagers had drained 4 more of these so-called bottomless ponds, and each one hid the same thing: another entrance, another vast man-made cavern, water sealing the opening so completely that generations of local families had fished, washed clothes, and let their children swim directly above a hidden underground world without ever suspecting it was there. By 1994, researchers had mapped 24 of them, cut into the siltstone hills of Zhejiang province, and they still don't know if that's all of them. Some remain flooded. Some may not have been found at all. So the first question is simple: how much work are we actually looking at? Archaeologists estimate the total volume of rock removed across the known caverns at close to 1 million cubic meters, enough excavated stone to fill roughly 400 Olympic swimming pools, all of it cut away by hand and carried out through narrow entrances that give almost no sense from the surface of the scale hidden underneath. To put that in human terms, if a single skilled worker spent every day cutting and hauling stone by hand, estimates suggest the full project would represent millions of individual labor days, concentrated in one location, using nothing but hand tools for a purpose nobody wrote down. Some chambers reach nearly 100 feet in height, with ceilings that soar overhead like the inside of a hollowed-out mountain, and the largest complex spans an area comparable to several football fields, all of it carved downward and inward from a surface that gave almost no hint of what lay beneath. That answers the scale. It doesn't answer the method, and this is where things get genuinely strange. Because every wall and ceiling inside these caves is covered in the same feature: uniform, evenly spaced, arc-shaped chisel marks, all cut in the same direction, at the same angle, at what appears to be the same consistent depth. Stand inside one of these chambers today, and the effect is almost hypnotic. Thousands of identical parallel grooves running across stone surfaces the size of a warehouse wall, curving gently from one edge to the other as if drawn with a single continuous motion, repeated by hand, over and over for years. This isn't the look of individual workers hacking away at rock, however they pleased. It's the look of a standardized technique, taught, repeated, and enforced across an enormous workforce, over what was likely years, if not decades, of continuous labor. Researchers studying the tool marks have concluded that whoever organized this project didn't just have labor, they had a method, refined enough to keep thousands of chisel strokes visually identical across chambers the size of city blocks, a level of quality control that implies training, supervision, and almost certainly some form of inspection process most people wouldn't associate with a project this old. And yet, despite that level of organization, archaeologists have never recovered a single tool from the site. No chisels, no hammers, no discarded equipment of any kind, anywhere in the complex. Excavation on this scale should have left behind broken tools, worn-out implements, something, the way construction sites always do, ancient or modern, because tools break, get lost, or simply aren't worth carrying back out once a project ends. Instead, whoever finished this project seems to have cleaned up after themselves so thoroughly that not one physical trace of their equipment remains, as if the entire site was deliberately swept clean the moment the last chisel stroke was finished. Which brings us to a detail that surprised structural engineers more than almost anything else in the caves. Scattered throughout the largest chambers are massive stone columns, left standing exactly where the builders chose to leave them, rather than carved away like the rock surrounding them, rising from floor to ceiling at intervals that look, at first glance, almost decorative. At first glance, this looks like a practical necessity. Stone pillars holding up a stone ceiling. But when the Chinese Academy of Sciences analyzed the load-bearing capacity of these columns, they found something more deliberate. Each one appears positioned and proportioned to support weight loads exceeding 3,000 tons, far beyond what would have been needed simply to keep the ceiling from collapsing under its own weight at the time of construction. That's not guesswork, that's structural calculation, applied by people working with hand tools and torchlight, in a project with no historical paper trail to explain how they knew what they knew, centuries before anyone had written down a formula for load distribution in solid rock. Here's where the mystery turns from strange to almost unbelievable. China, going back over 2,000 years, kept extraordinarily detailed government records. Tax registers, census counts, military campaigns, construction projects large and small, all of it documented by an administrative culture obsessed with paperwork, down to grain rations issued to individual laborers on projects far smaller than this one. Yet nowhere, in any surviving text from the region or era, is there a single reference to a project that would have required removing nearly 1 million cubic meters of stone. No mention of the workforce. No mention of an emperor or local ruler commissioning it. No mention of what happened to the material once it was cut. Close to 1 million cubic meters of siltstone that had to go somewhere, hauled out by hand, and never accounted for in a single surviving ledger. For a civilization this thorough about writing things down, the silence surrounding a project this massive is by itself one of the strangest parts of the whole discovery. So if there's no written record, what do we actually know about when this happened? Dating the caves precisely has proven difficult, since the stone itself can't be carbon dated and no organic material tied directly to construction has been recovered, no charcoal from torches, no discarded wood, nothing that would let scientists apply the dating methods that work at most other ancient sites. Based on comparative toolmark analysis and regional geological context, researchers generally estimate the caves are at least 2,000 years old, possibly dating to the Warring States period or the early Qin dynasty, but this remains an estimate, not a confirmed date, and some researchers argue the true age could stretch further back than currently assumed, into a period even less documented than the one usually proposed. And that uncertainty extends to purpose as well. Without records, historians are left working from the physical evidence alone, and it doesn't point clearly in one direction. Some researchers have proposed the caves functioned as a hidden military staging ground, defensible, self-contained, and easy to conceal beneath water, a place an army could shelter or store supplies without ever being spotted from the surface. Others suggest a large-scale stone quarry extracting material for construction projects elsewhere, though no matching stonework using this exact material has been definitively traced back to Longyou. Still others point to a single carved relief found in one chamber, depicting a horse, a fish, and a bird, alongside a headless stone statue carved from material that doesn't match the surrounding rock, arguing these details suggest ceremonial or symbolic significance beyond simple utility. None of these theories has enough evidence behind it to be considered settled, and mainstream archaeology treats all three as plausible without favoring one over the others. What makes the Longyou caves different from most ancient engineering mysteries isn't the scale, impressive as it is. It's the total absence of a paper trail in a culture that documented almost everything else. Every other detail, the volume of stone removed, the uniformity of the tool marks, the calculated strength of the support columns, points to a project that was planned, funded, and executed by people who knew exactly what they were doing, with enough authority to organize a workforce large enough to complete it, and enough discipline to keep the entire operation, tools and all, out of the historical record entirely. The only thing missing is any record of who they were. Local officials have only opened a handful of these 24 chambers to visitors, partly for preservation, partly because the remaining caves haven't been fully explored or stabilized, which means that somewhere beneath the hills of Zhejiang province, there may still be chambers no living person has entered since whoever sealed them shut, for reasons nobody wrote down, all those centuries ago, waiting under still water in ponds that look, to anyone standing beside them today, like nothing more than quiet countryside scenery. If a civilization known for recording everything could still lose the story, one of its largest engineering projects, it raises an uncomfortable question about the next site on this channel. A solid iron pillar that has stood in the open air for over 1,600 years without rusting, using metallurgy modern engineers still can't fully explain. That's where we're headed next.